Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Twin Sleep Talk podcast, where we dive into parenting wisdom from someone who's been there. I am a twin sleep consultant, a registered nurse of 18 years, of 5, including fraternal twin boys. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about my story when it comes to having twins and why you can learn from my mistakes. So if you are pregnant with twins, know someone who's pregnant with twins, or have newborn twins, this episode is for you. Make sure you subscribe to follow along and get notified when all of my episodes go live. I've got a couple really great ones lined up, so make sure you are subscribed so that you hear about it. All right, let's dive in. So if you didn't watch my previous episode, that's where I found out that I was having twins as my second and third babies. My daughter was 2 when they were born, and we were living in the tiny little East African country of Djibouti. So when we left off, I was talking about how we finally had started getting on track for a little bit more sleep. Now I want to talk about what happened when we returned to, if that sounds interesting to you, keep on listening and make sure again that you subscribe and turn on your notifications. Okay, so we were living in my parents' house in Minneapolis, and my twins had literally turned 3 months to the day that we were boarding a flight back to Djibouti. And I was very nervous about this, very nervous about flying with 3 under 3. But my parents are amazing people, and they actually have been dreaming of a vacation in France. So we decided to all fly together to Paris. And then from Paris, my husband and I and our 3 children were going to be flying direct down to Djibouti. So I guess it would have been 7 of us, my parents, my husband, myself, and our 3 little ones. We boarded the flight in Minneapolis and headed over to Paris. It was a tough flight, but having my parents on the plane was so helpful. What I did was I sat in a bulkhead seat and had one of the twins in that bassinet. My parents were not able to get a bulkhead seat. There was only one bassinet available on that flight. And so they held the other baby between the 2 of them. And then my daughter was in a car seat since she was 2. She couldn't be a lap infant. And we decided she would just do best in a car seat. So she actually did really well on the flight. She had an iPad, and we just kind of allowed her to use that. And honestly, the baby in the bulkhead bassinet, he slept most of the time. I was still breastfeeding, but also using some formula. So I had to figure out how to pack that. What I did was I brought pre-mixed formula. They allowed me to check it. And I bought some disposable bottle, like the nipples, so that I could just throw it away whenever he was done with it. And I didn't have to try to worry about washing bottles or hanging on to them. So we landed in Paris, and we actually had a 24-hour layover. We had these great ideas. Before we had our twins, we were like, we should use that layover to go see the sights, which is what we would have done normally when it was just the 2 of us, or even when we just had our daughter. But when we had our twin newborns, we realized pretty fast that that was just not going to be possible. So instead, we got a hotel room in the airport. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in that airport, but again, this was 10 years ago, and it was a long walk from where we landed to get all the way through the airport over to the hotel. But once we did, it was fantastic because we could actually sleep for a few hours before our next flight. Now, my parents, they stuck around in Paris, and then they went off to see the sights themselves. And we got on a flight down to Djibouti. Now, I'm going to tell you one of my secrets that I found living abroad and flying a lot. The crew and the pilots, they love it when you acknowledge them and appreciate them. And truly, especially right now, I'm recording this during 2025, a government shutdown, and I really do appreciate all of the men and women who are air traffic controllers and who are flying and make it possible for those of us to take vacations or go on work trips or just live abroad. So what I did was I actually just wrote a card and kind of said, thank you. I appreciate all the sacrifices you make in this job. And making it possible for people like me to live the life that I live. And I literally just gave them like a bag of Dove chocolates that I think I got at like Target or something like that. And I handed it to the crew. Actually, what happened was we got seated and the flight attendant was kind of like rude with us. We had our 2-year-old in her seat, and then my husband and I each had a baby because we were trying to save money and not put the babies in their own seats. But in retrospect, we really should have just purchased seats for them so that we could have carried car seats on. But we didn't do that. We were trying to save money, but that's what I would have done differently. Anyways, we're sitting on the flight and the flight attendant comes over and he was kind of being a little bit rude to me, or at least I perceived it that way. And so I was like, you know what? I got this chocolate. I don't need to be taking it with me. And so I gave it to him along with the card. And pretty soon he comes back and he said, do you work in the airline industry? I said, no, I don't. We work for an NGO. We do like humanitarian relief work in Djibouti. And he then came back and told us that the pilot wanted to upgrade us to business class, which was amazing. So actually, I think we did have one car seat with us because thinking back, we did have so we had our daughter in her car seat and then we had one baby in his like infant carrier. And so we got up to the business class and they had us put one baby in a seat next to me. And then the other baby, he was in the bassinet. And we got to have space to ourselves. And it was just kind of a glorious flight. We all slept. It was fantastic. And then kind of reality hit when we landed in Djibouti. It's like walking into an oven. It is so hot, actually, maybe more like a dryer because it was really windy. The sand was kicking up. This was in May, so during a really hot time in Djibouti. And we get off the flight, we're in the airport, we're with the babies, and I literally had one carry-on bag. Literally one, because we had checked everything else, all of our earthly belongings. I think we had about 18 bags between the 5 of us. And so we're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting and realizing not one of our bags made it to Djibouti from Paris. So we got picked up by our coworkers and they took us back to our home and we had some clothes there, some things, but for the most part, we were sort of stranded. We had no internet connection, no phone connection. It's a whole thing. We ended up using Twitter to contact the airline publicly, called them out on losing our bags. And lo and behold, they did end up finding them, but we had to wait a full week before they actually arrived in the country because they only had flights to the country once a week. So our community really stepped up and supported us through that time, through the time change, through the culture shock. And it was less of a culture shock for my husband and I, but my daughter was really struggling because she did not remember living there, even though she had already lived there for the first year of her life. She didn't remember it at all. I was kind of like starting to have some hallucinations even. There were goats outside making noises and I thought they were the babies. And I started getting really angry at the goats because every time I would fall asleep, I would hear a goat and think that it was a baby. I even started to have these moments where I was actually getting angry with my babies when they wouldn't sleep. And I was just really starting to come apart mentally. It was such a challenging time. Not only was it so hot, there was the time change. We had lost our bags. I had 2 babies that kind of were sleeping before we left, and now everything had gotten thrown off. My daughter also wasn't sleeping. So things were just sort of completely falling apart. Our budget was pretty limited, but we felt like it was worth it to invest in hiring 2 women to come and help us in our home for the entire day. So someone would come in the morning, she would help me with just cleaning the house and helping with the kids, the laundry, and just kind of that day-to-day stuff. And then I had somebody that would come for the evening and she would help me with, again, cleaning, getting things going with dinner, cleaning up after dinner. And then she also would help me get all of the kids to bed. And then I also had team members from our NGO that would sometimes stay with us even during the night, and they would kind of help take care of the babies just so we could get ourselves on track. But even after about 3 months of this, I really started to unravel mentally, and my marriage was totally felt like it was falling apart. And so we finally went to our team leaders, thinking that this kind of meant the end of our career and our time overseas. But thankfully, they allowed us to go and relocate to a team in Nairobi, Kenya, which I mentioned before in my last episode is this beautiful, lush, cool, green, modern city. And so we moved there, and honestly, things got a lot better. I still had somebody coming to my home who helped me caring for the children and with cooking and cleaning. Now, I'm going to get a little bit more into that on the next episode. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the cultural differences between America and where I was in East Africa in terms of asking for help. And I talked a lot about that on the last episode because I think it's so important, especially for us in America, to talk about, because in a lot of ways, moms here, we are expected to just kind of have it all together and to never ask for help, to never reach out, because that's like a sign that maybe we're not a good enough mom, or maybe we don't actually have all our ducks in a row. And it can also just be really hard for us because maybe we have different like relationships with our own mothers or sisters or friends. And it is hard just because a lot of us don't have great community anymore. We live such independent, isolated lives. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next episode. And I have a really great guest that you're going to love. But for now, I will just say it made it so much more feasible for me to just sort of live my life and have my husband at work. And I had part-time work that I was doing, and having somebody there was just one of the best things that I had during the first 2 years with my twins. So after we moved to Kenya, sleep got totally disrupted again. What had worked was no longer working. By the time we moved there, they were about 6 months old, and it had been about 6 months since we'd had a full night's sleep consistently, except for those kind of one-off nights where we had somebody staying with us that could help take care of the twins. And at this point, when we got to Nairobi, we really didn't have anyone to do that anymore. So I was kind of at a loss trying to figure out how I was going to get these two babies to sleep all night. I had a book. It was about the only book I could find that had to do with getting twins to sleep all night. And it really strongly encouraged the cry it out method. Now, I tried it a couple nights and I just really didn't feel comfortable with it. And it's really hard actually to implement the cry it out method if you have twins, because you are constantly afraid that one is going to wake up the other one. And truly, they do wake each other up. Even if you have white noise going, it can happen, especially if they're crying a lot. And so I just found it really hard to implement that. And then I would look up, this was kind of the era of mommy blogs was really, really popular, and Baby Wise was really popular. So I kind of looked into some of these methods, but none of them really laid out like how to do their methods with twins, how you could do these gentler sleep training methods with twins. And so I really had to dig into what is it that twins or that babies need in order to sleep that doesn't have to do with parents being hands-on the entire time. And that's how I started to develop the system that I use that helped my twins sleep through the night, even after all that moving and time change and travel and changing environments all the time, and living in temporary housing and not always having like the most stable living situation. So even through all of that, I use this system and it worked really well for me. And we'll get into that in some of my later episodes. But for now, what I just want you to know is that twins sleeping through the night is possible, and you don't have to use the cry it out method. Even if you're breastfeeding your twins to sleep at night, even if you're rocking them to sleep, or even if you're bringing them into your room to sleep with you because you don't want them to wake each other up. Even if you're doing all of those things, it's still possible for you to get your twins on the right track for sleep without using the cry it out method. If you want to learn more now, you can go ahead and click the link below and you can get my free twin sleep guide, the 5 twin sleep mistakes that you don't even know you're making. And I'm going to lay it out on what problems you need to fix in order to get your twins to sleep all night. If you like this story, would you go ahead and click subscribe and comment below? I would love to hear what you think. and if you ever experience something similar. Thanks so much for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.